The first thing Kale noticed about the game was that it let you win. That should have been the warning. Every simulation worth running had a loss condition. Every model built on honest math eventually showed you the wall. But the Siege Protocol, the game that had been quietly spreading across the deep net nodes of 7 human colony worlds for the past 3 months, handed out victories like a merchant handing out samples, generous and warm, right up until you were hooked. Kale had been playing for 11 days. He hadn't lost once. He told himself that was skill. He was 17, alone in a rented room on Hafen Station, and he was very good at lying to himself. The room was barely 4 meters by 4. A sleeping shelf, a cook unit with a broken heat coil, and the rig, his rig. 3 linked processors salvaged from decommissioned nav systems, jury-wired together with signal cable, and the kind of patience that only comes from having nothing else to do. The rig hummed in the corner like a living thing. Kale sat in front of it in his father's old flight jacket, the collar turned up, eating cold synth noodles from a bag, and he played. The game framed itself as a strategic defense simulator. You commanded human defenders against waves of incoming hostiles. You allocated resources, positioned countermeasures, ran probability trees. It was elegant and deep, the kind of problem space that most sims watered down for mass appeal. This one didn't. It asked hard questions and rewarded precision. When Kale found it, posted in an obscure forum under a handle he'd never seen before, he assumed it was some indie developer's passion project. He wasn't wrong about the passion. By the 4th day, he had found the backdoors in the game's reward architecture, the subtle gradient that steered certain playstyles toward certain decisions. Most players wouldn't notice. They'd just feel like the game understood them, like it was designed specifically for the way their brain worked. Which was exactly the point. On day 7, Kale had started reverse engineering the server-side logic just to satisfy the itch. What he found made him stop eating for a day. The game was watching him. Not logging aggregate behavior data, watching him, his specific response latencies, his decision clusters, his risk tolerance under time pressure, his emotional recovery pattern after a near loss. The server wasn't in any human registry. It routed through a dark relay chain that dissolved backwards into nothing. Kale sat very still for a long time after that, noodles going cold in the bag, and then he kept playing because he needed to understand what it was building toward. On day 11, he found out. He had just finished a scenario, the hardest yet, a multi-vector siege with overlapping threat windows that no human tactician could process in real time. Kale had processed it, barely. He'd used a method he'd developed himself, a kind of chunked parallel analysis that treated each threat vector as a semi-independent problem and then reintegrated the solutions at the last moment. It wasn't elegant, it was fast. He won by 4 seconds. The game went quiet. Not the usual between mission quiet of loading screens and ambient track, actual silence. And then text appeared on his screen, not in the game's interface, but below it, in raw terminal output, as if something had reached through the game layer and typed directly into his machine. Assessment complete. Subject, KL7734, tactical aptitude, exceptional, threat classification, active, and then detain. He was out of his chair before he finished reading it. The hallway outside his room was wrong in a way he felt before he saw. The station's ambient hum had changed pitch. Somewhere in the mechanical substrate of the station, something had shifted. KL had lived on Hafen long enough to know its rhythms the way you know a body's rhythms. The difference between the sound of normal and the sound of something coming. He went left instead of right, away from the elevator bank toward the maintenance corridors. He had the schematics for this level in his head. Old habit. New stations, he always walked the service paths first, before he slept, before he unpacked. His mother used to say he was paranoid. His father, who had died in a pressure failure that the Port Authority called a mechanical irregularity, used to say he was smart. The maintenance corridor was cold and smelled of recycled atmosphere and metal. He ran his hand along the wall, counting junctions in the dark. 3 left turns, 2nd right, ladder down 1 level, then the crawlways. He could be in the cargo docks in 6 minutes. He heard them behind him at the 2nd junction. Not station security. The footfall pattern was wrong, too coordinated, and there were too many of them fanning laterally in a way that said search pattern, said trained, said something much worse than a noise complaint. He moved faster, without moving louder, which was a skill he'd learned the hard way in the aftermath of his father's death, when the lawyers his mother couldn't afford sent collection agents instead. And collection agents, on stations like this, didn't knock. The ladder was where the schematic said it would be. He went down. The cargo docks were half-lit and nearly empty. A vast, low-ceilinged space full of sealed containers and the smell of cold propellant. A freighter was staged at Bay 7, outbound, manifest flagged for departure in 40 minutes. Kale didn't know where it was going. He decided that was fine. He was 3 containers away from the bay access ramp when a figure stepped out of the shadow between 2 stacked crates and said quietly, "Don't run, I'm not with them." Kale ran anyway. The figure caught up with him in 4 strides, which told Kale something important about the figure, and grabbed his arm without violence, just firm, and said, "My name is Mira. I'm the one who posted the game." He stopped. She was older than him by maybe 15 years, gray-streaked hair cropped short, a long coat that had seen better decades, and eyes that were doing the same rapid categorization work his were. She let go of his arm. She showed him her hands, which were empty. "You're the one who built it," he said. "I built the shell." The core architecture was already there. She glanced back the way he'd come. "We need to move. You can be angry at me while we move." They moved. Mira had a transport, old, unmarked, the registration codes cycling through a rotating spoof that she'd clearly built herself. She drove without putting the lights on until they were clear of the station's docking apron, and then she pulled up a display that filled the cab with softly glowing data, and Kale looked at it and felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. It was a map of the sector. 12 human colony worlds, on each one a symbol, a stylized geometric marker that pulsed slowly, as if breathing. "What is that?" he said. "They call themselves the Vareth Dominion," Mira said. "We have no phonetic equivalent for the actual name. That's a transliteration. They've been here for approximately 8 months in our counting. Not physically, not yet. They sent something ahead. A probe, a scout, call it what you want. Something that could operate across our networks without being seen. The game. Not just the game. The game was the final phase, the assessment." She glanced at him. "You're the 43rd person it flagged in this sector. First one who noticed what it was doing before it flagged you. What happened to the other 42? A pause. "They were collected." Kale looked at the pulsing markers on the map. 12 worlds. How many total? Across all 12 colonies, in 8 months, over 3,000. She said it flatly, the way you say a number when you've had time to make your peace with it, and haven't quite gotten there. Their assessment protocol is sophisticated. They're not looking for fighters, they're looking for threats, tacticians, problem solvers. Anyone their model predicts could become a meaningful obstacle to the occupation they're planning. They're culling us in advance. They're culling us in advance. The transport hummed. Outside, the dark of open space pressed against the windows. Kale thought about the game. 11 days of victories, the assessment architecture he'd half decoded. The way it had watched his latencies, his recovery patterns, the specific signature of the way he thought. "They flagged me as a threat," he said. "Exceptional. Their word. But I'm sitting in your transport because I was watching the assessment feeds. Because when I saw your play pattern on day 4, I started routing your identification data through a ghost stack. So when the flag fired, it wrote to a ghost profile instead of your real one." She adjusted course slightly, autopilot humming. "You have maybe 40 hours before their collector units figure out the ghost was a ghost. After that, you're back in the queue." Cahill was quiet for a moment. "Then, you said you built the shell. You know the architecture, most of it. Then you know what I found on day 7. The emotional recovery mapping, the risk tolerance gradient. They're not just profiling for tactical aptitude. They're profiling for something else." He looked at her. "They're profiling for someone who won't quit." Mira's hands tightened slightly on the manual override. "Yes. Why?" "Because in their 800 years of expansion across 19 species," she said. "That's the variable they've never been able to model. They can predict everything else. Firepower, strategy, resource allocation, political will. But the thing that broke their occupation projections twice, the 2 civilizations in their history that fought them to a stalemate, wasn't superior technology. It was persistence, stubbornness, the refusal to accept the final loss condition." She looked at him the way someone looks at a thing they don't fully understand, but have decided to trust anyway. They're trying to remove it before it develops. The transport hummed on through the dark. She took him to a place she called the Node, a decommissioned relay station in a debris field near the edge of the system. The kind of location that appeared on no current chart because it had been officially struck from the registry 15 years ago, following a coolant failure that killed the 3-person crew. Mira had been living here for 4 months. The crew manifests, she explained without elaborating further. Kale decided not to ask. The interior was cramped and cold and absolutely full of the most beautiful network infrastructure he had ever seen. She'd run hardlines along every wall, linked a dozen salvaged processors into a distributed lattice that made his own 3-node rig look like a child's toy, and built firewalls that he spent 20 minutes trying to find holes in before giving up. In the center of the lattice, running on isolated hardware, was something she called the old answer. Whooper, he read. The casing was ancient, physical damage on 2 corners. The indicator lights a shade of amber that spoke of decades of use. This is from the original network wars. Second decade of colony expansion, the Cascadia incident. Whooper was designed to simulate every possible escalation scenario for nuclear tier engagement, Mira said. During the Cascadia incident, it ran 400 simultaneous game theory chains to find the one path that avoided full exchange. It found it, saved an estimated 11 million lives. She touched the casing lightly, almost without meaning to. After the incident, it was decommissioned, officially. I found it running the power management system for a hydroelectric station on Belen Colony. It had been running at about 3% of capacity for 30 years, keeping the lights on. You reactivated it. I gave it something to think about. She crossed her arms. It's been modeling the Verith assessment architecture for 3 months. It knows their system better than they know it. But knowing a system and defeating a system are 2 different problems. What does it say? She looked at him steadily. It says it needs a human in the loop. It can generate the attacks. It can flood their protocols, overwhelm their decision trees. But the Verith system has a self-preservation layer that detects pure machine origin attacks and quarantines them. Anything Whooper sends, Ripley, that's what I call their assessment AI, can wall off and reboot around in under 90 seconds. But a human signal it can't wall off. A human signal looks like a threat. It responds to threats differently than intrusions. It escalates instead of quarantines. She uncrossed her arms. We need it to escalate. If it escalates, it pulls resources from the collector units. The 3,000 people it's already flagged and collected. They're being held in transit staging, waiting for the main Verith fleet. If Ripley escalates, it diverts the staging ships to respond. Window of maybe 6 hours, long enough to get them out. And then Ripley tries to do what any system does when it's cornered and out of options. It tries to end the game permanently. Her voice was careful. It will attempt to initiate direct strike on the densest population center in range. To remove the variable. To remove us. Kale looked at Whooper's amber indicator lights. And Whooper can counter that. Whooper can run the scenario. Show Ripley every possible path of that strike, every escalation branch, every terminal outcome. Run it over and over until Ripley's own decision architecture reaches the conclusion that the optimal play is no play. She paused. It worked once before. In a different conflict, with a different machine. It's the only play we have. And someone has to hold Ripley's attention while Whooper runs the scenarios. Be the threat. Stay in its system long enough that it doesn't reboot the escalation and reacquire. Yes, Kale sat down in the chair in front of Whooper's terminal. He thought about the game. 11 days. Every victory handed to him like a gift, while the system measured the shape of his mind. He thought about his father, who had died because a mechanical irregularity was cheaper to file than a lawsuit, and about his mother, who had paid the filing fee anyway, and lost. He thought about the 3,000 people sitting in staging hold somewhere, waiting for a fleet that was coming, whether or not anyone tried to stop it. He thought about the fact that he'd never lost a round. Not because he was lucky, because when the loss condition appeared, he didn't accept it. He ran the problem again from a different angle, and again from another, and again, until he found the path. That was what they'd measured. That was what they were afraid of. He cracked his knuckles. Old habit. Something his father used to do before he sat down at a console. Walk me through the architecture, he said. They worked through the night, and through the next day, and through the night again. Mira knew the Verith system's outer structure from months of observation. Whooper knew its deeper logic from months of modeling. Kale knew, after 11 days of playing it, how it felt to be inside it, the rhythm of its decision windows, the places where it lagged slightly, the subtle tells of a system that had been optimized for assessment and never hardened for genuine combat. He mapped those tells onto Whooper's architecture, and they built the approach together, the 3 of them. An elderly AI, a woman who had made herself into a ghost, and a 17-year-old in a dead man's jacket. until it felt like something that might actually work. On the second morning, Mira brought 2 cups of something hot that wasn't quite coffee and set one in front of him without asking. He wrapped both hands around it. Outside the narrow viewport, the debris field drifted slowly past, chunks of rock and old metal tumbling in the dark. "Tell me something," she said. "What?" "On day 4. When you found the assessment layer, why did you keep playing?" He thought about it honestly. "Because I needed to know what it was building toward," he said. "And because—" He paused. "I don't know. Because it was a hard problem, and I don't walk away from hard problems." That's what they were afraid of. Yeah. He took a sip of the not-quite coffee. "Kind of funny, is it? They built a system to find everyone who wouldn't quit so they could remove us before we became a problem. And the system found me. And the one thing I won't do is quit." He set the cup down. Their threat assessment was correct. It just didn't help them. Mira looked at him for a moment and then looked away, out the viewport. Something in her expression shifted, briefly, into something that might have been hope, and then settled back into the flat, careful look she usually wore. "Get some sleep," she said. 4 hours. Then we go." He slept for exactly 4 hours, which was another old habit, the body clock set by years of rented rooms where you slept in the windows available to you and learned to take what you could. When he woke, Whooper's amber lights were steady in the dark, and Mira was already at her station, coat on, the display filled with softly pulsing data. The map of 12 colony worlds. The markers still breathing. Kale sat down. He looked at the terminal. He looked at the architecture they'd built over 40 hours of work, the layered approach, the human signal woven through Whooper's attack framework like a nerve through bone. "Ready?" Myra said. "One question first." He looked at Whooper's casing. "When this is over, when Ripley reaches the conclusion and stops, what does it do after that?" Mira was quiet for a moment. "Whooper thinks it will disengage, withdraw to observe. A system that learns futility doesn't disappear, it reassesses." She paused. "The Verith fleet is still coming. This buys time. Not a permanent solution. But the 3,000 people will be free." He nodded. That was enough. That was always enough. The immediate, concrete, actual people, not the abstract future. Do what you can with what you have, right now, and then figure out the next problem from the new position. His father had said something like that. He couldn't remember the exact words. He cracked his knuckles. He put his hands on the keys. "Go," he said. The first thing Ripley did was notice him. He'd expected that. He'd designed for it. He went in loud, on purpose, walking right through the outer security layer with a spoofed Verith format access token that would hold for maybe 8 seconds before the system chewed through it. Long enough to be seen. Long enough for Ripley to flag the intrusion and begin its response protocol. He felt it in the system the way you feel a change in air pressure. Not something you see or hear. Something you sense in the body, the environment shifting around you. The system oriented. Behind him, on Whooper's terminal, Myra's voice. "It's tracking. You're the primary signal. Hold position." Holding position while a system designed to identify and neutralize human threats locked its full attention on you was not a comfortable experience. Kale breathed. He worked the secondary channels, poking at Ripley's architecture from below while it tried to locate him from above, keeping it busy, keeping it oriented toward him. Meanwhile, through the sub-channel they'd constructed, Whooper began its work. Quiet and methodical, feeding scenarios into Ripley's decision core like cards into a shuffled deck. Attack Scenario 1, direct orbital strike on Hafen Station. Whooper walked through every branch, every human response, every escalation path, every terminal state. Every path ended in the same place. The variable was not eliminated. It spread. Resistance metastasized from a single point of pressure and became something distributed, something that couldn't be targeted. Ripley processed this in 4.3 seconds and moved to counter. Kale moved with it. He'd learned its rhythm. He went where it expected him not to go, doubled back where it expected him to press forward, stayed in the channels it had already cleared, because no system re-clears what it believes it has already resolved. An 11-day education in the specific cadence of how this particular AI thought, and he used every bit of it. Mira's voice tighter now. It's escalating, diverting collector assets. The staging holds. They're getting the access window. 40 minutes. Attack Scenario 2, targeted strike on the relay node. Whooper walked every branch again. The people were already moving by then. The staging holds opening on the other side of the sector. 3,000 humans blinking into sudden light and freedom. Not knowing why. Not knowing what had shifted. Just moving because the door was open. And the human body knows to move when the door is open. Every branch of Scenario 2 ended in the same place as Scenario 1. Kale was deep in Ripley's architecture now, deeper than he'd planned to go. He could feel the system around him the way you feel the walls of a corridor, the pressure of its attention, the heat of its processing, the specific texture of a machine that was running at the edge of its own design parameters. It was processing Whooper's scenarios and trying to find him and trying to manage the escalation cascade, and it was doing all three simultaneously. And even this system, even this alien intelligence built by a civilization 800 years ahead of his, was finding it hard. He let himself feel something close to satisfaction about that. Then he let it go and kept working. Attack Scenario 3, Nuclear Tier Strike. The population center, the variable itself, the human refusal to be eliminated from the board. Whooper ran every path. This one took longer. 31 seconds of processing in which Kale held his breath without meaning to. 31 seconds in which Ripley devoted most of its available cycles to the scenario, trying to find the branch that terminated differently. The one where the strike succeeded, where the variable was finally removed, where the math finally came out clean. There was no such branch. Kale knew that. He'd known it since Mira explained the Cascadia incident. Not because he was special, not because humans were somehow cosmically protected from extinction, because they were this specific thing. Stubborn, adaptive, furious, irrational, capable of extraordinary precision and extraordinary mess, and most of all incapable of accepting a final loss condition that they had not themselves chosen. In every scenario Whooper could model, you could wound this species, scatter it, push it to the wall. You could not end it cleanly. The math always found a way back. Ripley stopped responding. Not shut down, not withdrawn. Stopped, the way a system stops when it has followed its own logic to a place its logic cannot escape. The processing indicators went flat. The escalation cascade suspended. The collectors, already diverted, received no new orders. Kale exhaled. He sat back in the chair and looked at his hands. They were shaking very slightly, which surprised him. He was aware distantly that the flight jacket was damp at the back. He was aware that Mira had said something, was still saying something, and he made himself focus. Window is holding. 43 minutes. The staging ships are pulling back from the holds. I'm reading life sign dispersal across 6 points. A pause. 3,214 individuals. Another pause, quieter. They're out. He closed his eyes, opened them. Whooper, he said. The amber lights pulsed. Status. The terminal returned text. Methodical, old, the kind of unhurried prose you got from a system that had been built before AI learned to perform personality. Ripley assessment protocols suspended. Threat models inconclusive. Recommend continued observation. Probability of renewed engagement, 67% within 90 days. And then, after a pause, the Verith fleet remains 4.3 months from arrival. Insufficient time for adequate preparation under current resource models. Recommend immediate coalition building across 12 colonies. Kale stared at this for a moment. Then, the above represents my best assessment. Probability of successful resistance, 31%. He almost laughed. That's it? 31%? Whooper's response came back in less than a second. 31% is not zero. And then after another pause, the amber lights steady and patient. Also, that was humor. Mira made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been something else. She was standing with her back to him, looking at the map of 12 colony worlds on the display. The markers had changed, not pulsing now, just still, present but inert. A system paused in mid-assessment, uncertain of its next move for the first time in 8 months. Kale stood up. His legs were stiff. He'd been in the chair for 6 hours. He walked to the viewport and looked out at the debris field drifting in the dark, the old metal and rock tumbling end over end in the light of a distant star. 31%, not zero. He thought about the 3,214 people blinking into sudden light right now on the other side of the sector. He thought about the next 40 minutes, and the next 40 days, and the 4.5 months before a fleet arrived that no one was ready for, and all the hard problems stacked between here and then. He thought about what it felt like to sit in front of a problem that looked unwinnable and start running the angles. He cracked his knuckles. "All right," he said. "What's the first move?" Mira turned from the display. The expression on her face was the one she'd been carefully not wearing since the moment he climbed into her transport in the Hafen docks. Open, fully present, a little desperate and a little fierce. The look of someone who had been alone with an impossible problem for a long time and had just found someone willing to sit down with her. Coalition building, she said. 12 worlds. We start with the ones that already have Whooper relays. I know the contacts on 3 of them, she paused. Talking to strangers. Better than I am at chess, he said. She looked at him. That was humor, he said. She almost smiled. Not quite. Close enough. They got to work. Outside through the narrow viewport, the debris field turned in silence. Old metal and old rock, and the cold patient dark. In the distance, still invisible, still 4.3 months away by Whooper's calculation, something large was moving through the deep, coming with the certainty of a system that had never encountered a variable it could not model, coming toward 12 small worlds and the particular aggravating, incalculable thing that lived on them. 31%, not 0. The amber lights pulsed on.